Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, as the case may be. Hello and welcome to Trust Q&A Live here on Facebook, on our LinkedIn channel, or X channel, as the case may be now, which is hashtag Trust Fundraising, or Trust Fundraise, and then as well on Moneytree Fundraising's LinkedIn page. For the next half hour, I'll be answering your questions about trust fundraising. For those who don't know, I'm Deanna Wolf, the Senior Consultant for Trust Fundraising here at Moneytree Fundraising. I've been a trust fundraiser for 21 years now, so I don't suggest that I know all the answers, but I've done a lot and I've been around. And of course, there are always multiple answers to things, and multiple ways to do good trust fundraising, so keep that in mind. After the summer break, we're going to be here now on the third Thursday of every month from 12:15 to 12:45. And you can find us here on Facebook's Trust Fundraising Hub, the Moneytree Fundraising Hub. And I'm just going to double check to make sure that everything's going well. The Moneytree Fundraising Hub on LinkedIn, which is Moneytree Fundraising, as well as on X, which was formerly Twitter, under hashtag Trust Fundraise, as I said at the beginning. We do record these sessions, so if you can't find them on our Moneytree Fundraising YouTube channel, or if you're not able to be here, you'll be able to find it on our fundraising YouTube channel. Those of you who've noticed or have been here before will notice that my background is a bit blurred. The summer has resulted in various rooms in the house getting sorted out and everything getting dumped in the office behind me. So rather than expose you to all of that, I thought I'd just blur. Our next session, should anyone be looking to write it down, is going to be on the 19th of October. So feel free to ask us any questions you have in the comments below on Facebook or on LinkedIn, as they will come through to me. Now, one of the things is that I've gone through our Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook. That tends to be where I am a lot of the time. And I found a bunch of questions that showed up on there, and I wanted to let you know and give you some responses, but do feel free to ask a question. There's a nameless Facebook user who said that they're happy to be here, so that's great, because I'm happy to be back. One of the questions we had was Ruth Block, and she asked us about training and CPD options, particularly when she isn't a new trust fundraiser. And then there was another question just before I came on, generally about trust fundraising training and where you can find it. There's not a lot of options out there for trust fundraising, unlike many of the other streams. There are a few of the usual providers. We often get this question in the hub. So my suggestion would be do a query on search, or a query on training in the hub, and you should be able to find quite a number of providers that do offer things. I know we do as well, and that gets offered periodically. We put it in there. Trust Fundraising Hub also has a link of other fundraising places you can go and other training sections. So if you are somebody who offers training, there is a pinned post that you can post it on. One of the things I would say is, if you're looking for training for yourself, do a skills audit at what you have. There isn't a lot out there. So a lot of times what we have to do is pigeonhole or put a round peg into a square hole for opportunities that work for continuing professional development. So do a skills audit for yourself. If you need writing, it may not be that you're going for trust fundraising training. Maybe it's a creative writing course you actually need instead. Or if you're looking for project design, maybe you want to go in and find something to do with project design. Or if it's marketing, there's a lot of other skills in other areas. The other thing is, take a look at the major gift fundraising proponent, or major gift, and possibly some of the corporate fundraising courses that are out there, because there are skills that are transferable to trusts and foundations. We tend to be quite detail oriented, so it's more along those lines. I know that in the past, one of the things I had trouble with was picking up the phone and calling a funder. And so I did take a course at one point, probably about 10 years ago now, on difficult conversations and using the telephone just to ask those questions. And some of it came down to just scripting myself in advance. The other thing is Beth had answered this question in advance, and she'd said things like coaching, and then there's mini courses, of course, which pop up all over the place. So coaching is good. So that's it. It's about finding where you can find things and where you can repurpose information. Just had 2 questions come in. This is great. One is I'm not getting names, unfortunately, because I'm using another system to do the recording. So the question is, we're receiving a number of rejections to a community engagement project at the moment due to not having enough reach. How would I articulate our reason for having fewer beneficiaries is so that they can create longer term impact? And the person feels like funders are more interested in numbers reached rather than impact at the moment. And that's for quick wins. There are a lot of funders out there who are looking for numbers because they have their own targets to reach on numbers. And so what I would say is pull together your arguments on why. You need to really articulate why it's more important to have a depth of impact rather than a breadth of impact. It's not easy, and I don't know what area you're working in, so I can't give you that information, but it can sometimes be by indicating where 0 is for everyone. So if you're working with a lot of a fair few or all of your beneficiaries are starting well below where everyone else is at 0, the norm for them is much lower on a scale than the average group, then it's probably a good idea to establish how far below and how much work is required to bring them to the point where they're competing on an equal stage with everyone else or an equitable stage with everyone else. And indicate why that impact is more important. I would still apply for it and give them the answers, because if they're only going on numbers, it may be that they don't realize that the impact needs to be depth rather than breadth. The other thing is if it's a funder who's obviously looking for numbers and obviously looking for a large group, you may want to not go to them in the first place, because a lot of people are over-targeted or oversubscribed. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. And that oversubscription is really quite difficult for people. It's making the game harder for everyone. So there are funders who will go for depth and there are funders who will go for breadth. A lot of times the lottery often goes for broad, the breadth and the number of applicants that you can approach. If you are going for a smaller number, you really need to impact on why the depth is important. I hope that answers it. It's not necessarily saying you're going to be able to get a lot more, but it's probably targeting closer to the ones where the impact is much more of an importance than the reach. Another question is, how can we as trust fundraisers influence trusts and foundations to give core costs? Well, a lot of them already are giving core costs. A lot more since COVID are giving towards core costs than before. The other thing is to decide and to really lay out what the difference between core costs and core services. So if you're only delivering one service, all of your costs are applicable to that delivery of that service. Another way that you can do it is by really taking a look at your services or your costs and dividing them out by service or project that you're delivering. So it's full economic costing. It shows exactly how much is being delivered on core costs. A lot of organizations still think that charities should be delivering services for free and the people who work for charities should be volunteering. Unfortunately, that's a culture change that needs to be talked about. I think one of the things that we tend to do is whine about core costs not being covered as opposed to finding solutions for it. So yes, you have core costs. Why do you need core costs? And are they reasonable? There's a fair few organizations their core costs aren't reasonable. And especially for large organizations, they're in big buildings. They have high costs to do with rent and utilities. They have an awful lot of staff, and there's not necessarily justification for that staff. People are paid at really high levels. And I'm not talking that people shouldn't be paid at a decent level. We all have bills to pay. but we shouldn't necessarily be going at really high levels. And organizations have, as charities, have the responsibility to really take a look at their core costs and make sure that they are working to the best use of those costs. It's not to say that the cheapest is the best and that you should be going really low, but I think it is really important that we take a good look and make sure that all the core costs we have are legitimate and are justifiable. And then it's just talking about why core costs are important, as opposed to whining about why core costs are important. And I have no idea, the person who's posted this, I have no idea what your situation is. And I know that there's an awful lot of people who do indicate why. But I think as a group, we need to indicate more, and also understand that it's our responsibility to cover those costs. It's not trusts and foundations' responsibility. They can choose how and when they spend their money. It's their money to spend. So I think what we need to do is start putting forth really good reasons, as opposed to anything else. We need to say why it's important that we need those core costs and what those core costs are covering. I hope that helps answer some of that. Please do ask another question. If it didn't quite answer what you're looking for, please do indicate it here, and ask the next question or a following question to it. I think the other ways on influencing is we need to talk about it more, and we need to post it more. We need to be really clear in our applications. We need to be really clear in our communications. We need to be clear in our marketing, why those costs are important and why those things are there and why they need to be covered. Also, don't always look for, if you're having trouble getting funding for core costs from trusts and foundations, and you are fundraising from multiple income streams, those things could possibly be funded from other income streams, like especially ones where there's unrestricted money coming in. Use unrestricted funding coming in from other income streams to cover those costs. If your finance team doesn't want to do that, or your communications or marketing team doesn't want to do that, you might want to have a good conversation with them, either as a fundraising team or through yourself or through your managers, but the fact that you can keep asking and keep knocking your head against the wall, but funding's not going to come for it, versus unrestricted money that's being used for projects that are infinitely fundable by trusts and foundations. Use those things. So I think it's a little bit of, we need to be more open about it, but justify it, logically justify it more in the public domain. But equally, we need to look internally and see whether we're applying the funding that we're getting from fundraisers or from fundraising in the best possible way to make sure that we can maximize the impact of that fundraising income from each of those streams. Another question. Thank you very much for saying that they're good answers. The Game Changer, which I think is a great name for a Facebook page or Facebook profile name, they asked about getting funds towards costs and materials for a construction project they run for your young people, and whether this was something that was possible from trusts and foundations. It is. The way you're going to have to go into it is talking about the project and why that project is really important for the young people. The costs of the materials is the cost of the project itself. So explain why a construction project for young people is important and why that's the right audience for it and that's the right solution. And then the cost of delivering that project is the materials. Also, a lot of those they're quite tangible. So if you said wood is going to cost £1 a foot for a 4x2. If you're listening in North America, it's a 2x4 for a piece of wood, and you need 3,000 of them. Then that's why at 6 feet long, that's why I think you need to go and you need to explain why that project is the right project. And then the cost of the materials are just going to be the cost of the project and the deliverable to help you reach the deliverables. We've got another question here from the Facebook user, a Facebook user. It says, "Hi, do you have any top tips on internal training education on trusts and foundations, in particular with clinical teams? Many thanks." Now, I'm not sure whether that's you training them or you working with them to get training for you? I'm going to go that it's you training them. With clinical teams, I would say with any team, any service delivery team outside in your organization, I would say that what you're looking to do is you need to talk about what role you play in helping them achieve their goals. So what role does Trusts and Foundations play? It brings in the funding that allows them the staff or the materials or the consumables that they need to deliver the work that they do. If that's the case, then you work backwards from that and then talk about why you need certain pieces of information and why that's important. Explaining why is often a very good thing. It's not just what. You don't just need this information and you need it tomorrow. Why do you need this information and why do you need it tomorrow? If you've got clinical teams, they're answering why all the time and they're asking why. Probably of the people that you're working with, the beneficiaries or your patients or your customers or your clients, however you're terming it, they're going to be asking them what happens and why that happens, and they're investigating that. You need to go in and say, if you want to ask and have this person, the cost for that person to come in and be part of your service delivery or your clinical testing or your research is X amount. So it requires you to do some background work to find out what the costs are and why it's important. And then it's a matter of possibly going through a grant application with them, especially one that asks a lot of questions, and determining why and why they need to give you the information you need, and then going through the time scale. So one of the things I talk about with trusts and foundations is that when you're doing a trust application and you're preparing your materials for them, you need to know who, where, why, what, when, how much, and how many. Now, often it was the 5 W's. I trained in journalism a long time ago, and that even in high school that stuck when I was doing things there. Those things, if you can answer those questions, and I've changed how to how much, and how many, because those are the kinds of things that bring the finance into it. But if you can ask, you're looking at things from that point of view. And if you can help them go through and understand this is why you're asking those questions, it gives them a reason to help you. Also, when you get the funding in from them, if beyond the training to get people on board, when you get funding in and they've helped you, go back and say your help was really, really important and it really helped us get this funding. Give them a reason to understand that their involvement is really, really important to this. I hope that answers it. Another question we got was from Ruth Jeffcoat, and she asked, is it really worthwhile trying to contact trusts which say no to unsolicited apps? We had a couple of answers on the question itself, and to a certain extent it's going to be saying no, except if you fit really, really, really well and you know that, but you fit the beneficiary area that they want to give, you fit the geographical area, you fit their purposes and their eligibility really, really well, and you're similar to other funders, other groups that they've given funding to on multiple years. So it's not just they've given it to one type of trust or one type of charity that you match. I would say try to get in touch with them to find out whether you are eligible. If they give a phone number, if they don't give contact details except an email address or anything, or they don't give a phone number, they don't give a quick way for you to get in touch with them, I would say don't bother unless you have trusts or trustees or your network has connections to them. Otherwise, if they do give you a phone number, call up and say, you've got an idea, this is what you'd like, is it worth you asking? Or how do you go about submitting? They're not saying unsolicited. So you say, how do I go about getting an idea in front of you? If they say, we're not accepting it, accept that. That's their choice, that's their prerogative, that's their right to say that they aren't accepting applications. If they do say that you need to put some information in. Sometimes this saying they don't accept unsolicited is a gatekeeping way of making sure that they're reducing the number of people who are going to get in touch and reducing the number of applications. Otherwise, be really clear. And if they be really polite, you're going through a gatekeeper. Every single person you speak with, if you can get in touch, is going to be marking and possibly passing that through as they followed the rules, they kept in touch. What you want to do is basically say, I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste mine. You say no unsolicited. Is there a way to get our application in front of you and to get, I used to joke and say, is there a way for us to get solicited for this? You find a way that is comfortable, a way to phrase it. But what you're asking is, are you allowed to submit? You're not asking for funding. You're asking to submit your application itself. I hope that helps. We've got another question. If fundraising for core costs and approaching a trust or foundation with no previous relationship that know that you're receiving, that you know are receiving many applications, so they say they have an 8% success rate, is it better to ask for a smaller sum to increase chances of success, or would that not be a factor? I would say if you've never asked them before, there's two parts to this question. If you've never asked them before, don't go in at the highest amount of money that you can go in at, the average gift. Go in at the minimum gift. You want to be seen as applying for funding and asking for their generosity. You're not asking, and their generosity is giving to you in the first place, not giving to you in a big amount. The second thing, and so I wouldn't go in too high. I've been doing this for about 21 years, as I've said. Having an 8% success rate in the entire time that I've been a trust fundraiser, I would say most funders have about a 10% success rate. 1 in 10 get funded of the applications that go to them. This is not the same as the number of applications that you submit and having that sort of 1 in 4 of your submissions are successful. This is the number of submissions that go to them that are eligible or that are successful. Keep in mind that of that success rate, a good probably 40 to 50% may be ineligible to apply, and they're just applying off the cuff for no reason, and that's causing a lot of stress in the industry and in the sector for that. If you're funding for core costs and you're approaching one that are receiving a lot of applications, be really clear about why you need those core costs, and be really clear about what those core costs are. Are those core service costs or are those overheads? And that's I would say the difference. Core costs can be, a lot of people refer to core costs as being everything, and it's all your staff, and it's your building, and it's the basic services that you provide to your beneficiaries. The basic services that you provide to your beneficiaries, including the costs of the room that you're using or the materials that you're using, those are core service costs. As if that's your regular everyday service. Core costs that are for overheads for people who are not directly attached to a project, those are harder because it's harder for organizations to be able to justify them. But if it's the things that you need to have to keep the doors open and keep the organization running, I would say work on those and apply. The worst that I can say is no. But if you're applying for core costs, apply with the understanding that it's going to be a little bit harder, but equally, if you've not got no prior relationship, they may not know you exist. So it's worth it, but make sure that you're targeting to them really, really well. And so that the things you do are the things they want to fund in the types of organizations they want to fund in the right geography of the area that they want to fund. And then I would go in at a low level. Probably if I'm going in for overheads and applying for putting overheads into a general application anyways, I never go much more than 10% of the project costs that I'm applying for, because it's going to be hard to justify that. And again, core costs are difficult to get from trusts and foundations. It's a little bit easier than it used to be, but it's not as easy as we would want it to be. So if you're fundraising from other areas, use unrestricted funding to cover those core costs. I had enough of a marketing and communications background in the 80s and the 90s to say, if it's not a sexy if it's not sexy, don't ask it of the people that you want. You're not going to go and ask funding for groceries to a building construction company. You ask where it's appropriate, and use a lot of common sense in it. So if you're being asked to get core costs, I can understand the need. I can understand the pressure of it. Talk to your finance team and find if there's other unrestricted income that you can move to core costs while covering, and apply to funders for those costs. Apply to funders for the costs that make sense to them and that are the things that they want to go for first. And then core costs go to other income streams if you possibly can, and unrestricted. I hope that gives you some answers and some and helps to answer your question. Going back to the list of ones that I found in our websites and our sites, Amy Lloyd had asked, how many times would you reapply to a funder if previous approaches had gone unanswered? Matt Taylor Roberts also asked something similar about reaching communities and how many times would you apply with alternative versions of the same project before giving up? It depends. It depends. And it really depends on the project, and it really depends on the funder and how many other funders you've got. I tend to ask a couple times, not too many times. It may be that you were in a pool of other applicants that had stronger asks at the time, so it's worth asking again. But if you are asking for the same project, you're just rewording it, you're asking for the same project. For reaching communities, get feedback from them first. It may be that the project, they don't want to fund the project, so don't keep asking for the project when they don't want to fund it. Even if you reword it, it's essentially the same project. And otherwise, I would say I'd ask 3 or 4 times, depending, just to find out whether it was the right project. If it was it's possibly the wrong project that you're asking for. So if you have something else or another service that you can apply for, try that. Try it probably twice for each project or each service that you're going in for, and probably no more than 4 times in total. And then wait 4 or 5 years. Sometimes guidelines change, trustees change, priorities change, who they're giving to may change, but don't beat a dead horse. There's no reason to do it. It makes things difficult for yourself, and you're just asking and asking and asking, and really what you're becoming is bothersome. And so they may say, oh my God, or oh my whoever, they're asking again. Haven't they learned? And then you get a bit of a black mark against you for going to keeping asking. Seek out feedback if you haven't after 2 or 3 times. If they aren't able to give you feedback, accept it, move on, spend your time more productively asking the people who might give you money or for whom you are a better fit. Matt also asked about whether it was worth changing their status as an organization from a CIC, so a charitably incorporated company, or charitable incorporated company, to a charity, and would it make a big difference? One of the answers that we got was, if you're looking for trusts and foundations, yes. A lot of trusts and foundations don't want to fund a company. If you are a charitable incorporated company, a CIC, you are a company. You are set up to make a profit. And you should be able, within a year or so of funding, if you're going through that structure, you should be making funding from the activities that you're delivering rather than from funders so that you can deliver those activities. The goal with CICs is almost as though you're becoming a social enterprise. Whether that name is correct or not, you are a not-for-profit company rather than a not-for-profit organization. And the organization, that's where the key of it is. You are a corporation or you are a company. And I would say, if you want your primary income streams to be coming from trusts and foundations, probably you should be a CIO or an SCIO rather than a CIC or a SCIC. it's just going to make things a lot easier for you in the long run. There are some trusts and charities, trusts and foundations out there that will fund them, but it's a lot more difficult, and you have to justify why you're not making enough of a profit to do so. Now, we had a bunch of other questions, but one of the things that I wanted to do there, I have two more questions to go. One, there's been a lot of quests. This comes up periodically. Rosie Osborne wanted to know what names would be recommended of setting up an email for communications with funders, such as grants at or fundraising at. I don't know about you, but whenever I tend to type in info at, I don't get responses. Either that website or that email box isn't monitored, or it's not monitored regularly, or the person who's monitoring it doesn't have answers, and so they don't bother to answer. I get that personally as when I apply for things commercially and to trusts and foundations. If it's charity itself, chances are that's their only email and that's the only one that they're going to. But if you're a trust fundraiser, people give to people. If you're a trust fundraiser and you want a response, do it through your own email. Funders should get in touch with you as an organization. If your organization has a general website or general email, fine, put that in. But if you're applying for funding, don't go general. You want to go specific. Put a named person down. It's the same thing when we're writing applications. When we say "Dear Trustees," it's always a little bit awkward. It's a lot easier if you can have a named person that you're applying to. So if you can, put down a name, whether that's your name or whether that's someone else's name. The number of requests over the summer and periodically about recommendations for an impact and evaluation specialist to come to do an end of project report had gotten quite high. I would say that getting that in place before your project makes the evaluation a whole lot easier, and finding out what you're measuring a lot easier. Know what you want to measure and why when you put the application in, when you're designing your project. That's when you should really be understanding, because that's when you're designing your project is when you're going to decide what the impact of that project is. Funders want to know what your impact will be. If you can know that you're measuring that in the first place, it makes it a lot easier. Doing it after the fact makes it difficult for the person you're paying to do it. If you're not doing it internally, you may not have been measuring things all along, and so you're going to have to make up numbers or say we don't have those numbers, despite the fact that in your application potentially you said we'll take attendance. I tend to think that doing it after the fact is somewhat akin to bolting the barn door closed after the horse has escaped. So try to do that first. We've also had lots of questions asking hub members if they've heard back from a particular funder. It's okay it's fine in the hub to put that in, especially if you know that you're getting some responses. The response lag is possibly due to not as many published. It's possibly due to the fact that a lot of trusts are oversubscribed, or they may not have the staff in because they too are short-staffed. Or they are volunteers and there's only so many hours in a day that they can give to this. So it's just taking longer. You think that they should have that. They said that they're going to do it in a certain amount of time. You're waiting on that. It will take as long as it takes. My rule of thumb when I'm doing applications, and it has been my rule of thumb for a long time, is that 6 months, I wait 6 months after the known deadline or the next meeting to put a soft no, and about 12 months after the submission deadline or the deadline for the hard no, after I know a meeting will have potentially taken place. And even then we're hearing some people getting funding after those dates. But if you've not heard within 6 months, they may have had 1,000 applications where this time as opposed to 100, and they're just not prepared and they don't have time to get back to everyone. There are 10,000 trusts out there, but there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of charities who are applying and asking them for money. So keep that in mind. And then finally, Louise Blackwell asked, I want to end on this one. I know we're a few minutes over now, but if you could offer just one piece of advice to trust fundraisers in the current climate, what would that be and why? My response to things like this is be resilient. Learn how to be resilient. Let the responses flow off your back. flow the way like water off a duck's back. And I often get my metaphors and idioms mixed up, so please bear with. Things should calm down over the next year or two, I hope. And I think they probably are already calming down a little bit based and the tension in the landscape of trust fundraising. It's I'm not feeling the urgency and the stress in the way people are posting things the way that they were, say, a year or a year and a half ago. And that could just be that we're getting used to this level of competition, and so that's making it easier. But it's going to take time. What I would say is the advice is get that resilience in place. Get targeted apps out there that are really, really targeted, that are really well written, and that are very good applications. Try to justify really well why you want the funding. And you want volume. Volume's still important, but you want to make it a targeted volume. So it's a high volume of targeted applications rather than a high volume of applications. Don't just send them out to everywhere, because if you're sending them out to everywhere, you're contributing to the problem of it being really, really difficult. It's actually proven, and I don't have the statistics on hand, but I know that I've read them several times over in various places, that if you take time to do a really good application and get really good applications out there rather than a high volume of applications, full stop, you actually get a better return on your investment, and you get a higher success rate back because you're taking the time with each application. Remember, trusts and foundations are people on the other side of those guidelines. They're a committee of people, and they have to act like a corporate body, but they are a committee of people. And so if you're targeting your application to them really well, you're not just sending out the same application to absolutely everyone, unless your application really talks about your project very, very well. You've tweaked it. You've maybe moved things around within the application. You make sure that the right names are in it. It is so obviously not a male merged application. If you can do that, your chances of getting funding are a lot better, because you're talking to the funders. You're telling them, I've got this project and it makes a lot of sense. So resilience is the thing I would say. Work on getting the applications out rather than on worrying about the application responses coming in. If you're working to a target of getting a certain number out, and you know that they're targeted applications and they're targeted asks, that will really help a lot. Now, we're now about 5, almost 10 minutes overdue. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. And if you weren't able to join us today, but you're watching this later on through one of the recordings places, including Trust Fundraising Hub, I know you can watch it back. Our next live Q&A will be on the 19th of October at 12:15, and I'll see you then. If you have any other questions, please do keep asking them in the Trust Fundraising Hub. It's a wealth. We've got thousands and thousands of members now. So hopefully, if it's not me and Beth and some of the other people who are regularly responding, do feel free to respond to questions. We're a community of really experienced people that are there alongside people who are just starting. Everyone's got valid questions, and hopefully we'll get more valid answers. Thanks very much, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.